When I came to Divine Rune City, he advised me to be on good terms with him if possible. He will surely be a great help to us. You must know that between the 7 provinces of Divine Void Divine Kingdom, the competition is extremely fierce. The blue-clothed old man seemed to guess what was happening. As he looked at Duke Fullmoon, he spoke with deep hidden meanings in his voice. Hearing these words, Duke Fullmoon felt as if he had swallowed a fly. What? You have grudges with Lin Ming? The blue-clothed old man's eyes were as bright and illuminating as torches. He could see that the conflict between Duke Fullmoon and Lin Ming wasn't as simple as stated. No matter what the reason is, it's best if you resolve these grudges if possible. Duke Fullmoon clenched his jaws. He tamped down the bitter sadness in his heart and tried to sound as sincere as he could as he said, yes. Fullmoon understands. After being maliciously tricked by Lin Ming and then reprimanded by this blue-clothed old man, Duke Fullmoon's mood could be imagined. 2 billion points, is there a higher bid? Song Wen loudly spoke from the auction stage. Potential bidders looked at each other with dismay. Some hesitated, seeming as if they would shout out a higher bid, but eventually none of them could summon the courage to compete with Lin Ming. Lin Ming's wealth was well known by all. It was simply impossible to defeat him. However, those with different boundaries had differences in vision. Some people had a highly exaggerated valuation of the dragon contract, similar to Lin Ming. In the eyes of some people, just that wisp of incomplete dragon soul was worth nearly 1 billion points. 2.1 billion. A pale man with red hair and a red beard, dressed in dark blue robes, spoke up. He was a half-step Empyrean powerhouse. In truth, he already possessed an Empyrean spirit treasure but was highly interested in this dragon contract. He was a loner without any influence behind him. Plus, he didn't care about access to Lin Ming's divine runic symbols, nor did he fear offending Lin Ming. Originally, most people thought that Lin Ming's ridiculous bid would already mark the end of this auction. But, they didn't think that another change would occur. Oh. That person is. This other person was similar to Lin Ming and sat in an ordinary room without any isolating array formation. This allowed Lin Ming to sense a faint dragon aura coming from his body. I see, so this person has a dragon race bloodline relationship. Lin Ming frowned a little. There were far too many outstanding existences here. It wasn't strange for someone to have a dragon race blood lineage. This meant that to this other person, the dragon contract was no less useful than it was for Lin Ming himself. 2.2 billion. Lin Ming shouted out, his voice calm. 2.3 billion. The old man's eyebrows jumped up. He knew that Lin Ming was rich, but he didn't know just how valuable this dragon contract was to Lin Ming. This was because of the difference in their bloodline density and purity. The old man's dragon bloodline was similar to a top figure from the Divine Realm's ancient dragon clan. But compared to Lin Ming, who had absorbed the supreme dragon bone from the God-Beast mystic realm, who had trained in the eternal demon abyss and within tragic Death Valley's God-Beast array formation where he had undergone a baptism of a black dragon's aura, the differences in bloodline was far too vast. This allowed Lin Ming to sense the bloodline of a dragon within the old man, but not the other way around. 2.4 billion. Lin Ming flicked his fingers. With this calm tone and expression, it was like points were nothing more than a number to him. With the bid having reached this degree, the old man's lips twitched. He gazed at Lin Ming's direction and quietly said, "Young man, the dragon contract is inestimably useful to me. You had best not continue competing for it. If you obtain it, you will only gain an Empyrean spirit treasure. That is simply a waste of heaven's gifts. But if I were to obtain it, the benefits it will give me cannot be imagined by you. I know you are rich, but isn't your strength limited? Gaining some grievances towards you, that might not be the best thing for you." The old man's words were unhurriedly spoken but carried a faint threat to them. He lifted his hand once more and grimly said, 2.5 billion. Is that right? Lin Ming chuckled. I thought that someone else would be competing with me, but I never imagined it would be someone like you. What a coincidence. The dragon contract will also be extremely useful in my hands. As for you, you just have a little bit of a dragon bloodline lineage. Do you really think it's necessary to remain so mysterious about it? Lin Ming's words shocked the old man. The old man immediately felt that this youth speaking to him couldn't be understood. He had clearly restrained his dragon race aura, and yet he had been seen through by Lin Ming. How was this possible? Lin Ming smirked. If you want to compete, then let us do so fairly and openly. Threatening me? Do you think that's useful? 3 billion. Lin Ming raised the bid by another terrifying amount, but his expression still remained calm. This sort of expression, if placed on anyone else, would have felt like an act. After all, 3 billion was an amount that even an Empyrean would have to mull over. But for Lin Ming, this expression that didn't seem to care about money at all was actually reasonable. Everyone had already witnessed Lin Ming's horrifying ability to gain wealth. In just half a month and with 2 promissory notes, he had earned 10 billion points in wealth. Just who could compare with him? You. The old man clenched his teeth and glared at Lin Ming with resentment. But, he remained silent. No matter how much he desired the dragon contract, he could only watch helplessly on as Lin Ming carried it away. 3 billion points had indeed surpassed the limits of his wealth. 3 billion points, is there a higher bid? Song Wen asked several times. When no one put forth a bid, he began counting down from 3. Then, in the end, the dragon contract was won by Lin Ming. Hence, to Lin Ming, the Divine Rune City auction had been perfectly finished. He had obtained everything that he wanted. Although 3 billion points for the dragon contract was a bit outrageous, Lin Ming could accept this trade. To him, the dragon contract was worth at least 2 billion points to begin with. And now that he had also learned it contained a wisp of a dragon soul, adding in another billion wasn't too great a loss. Novel being at. Tip, you can use left, right, and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters.
Still waiting. I need more hatred to do that. Feel my wrath. Need more time. Still waiting. That was just a taste. That was just a taste. Not ready yet. I've become stronger. I've become stronger.
Martial World. Chapter 1649 The Dragon X Pulse. Chapter 1649 The Dragon X Pulse. 10 days later, in the 7th grade Divine Runic room at the Divine Runic Masters Guild, Lin Ming was meditating in front of the Divine Runic table, preparing himself to draw up the 1000 improved Divine Runic symbols. In these 10 days, Lin Ming hadn't been idling around. He had been purchasing a massive amount of items. Besides the Jade Dragon Horn and Dragon Saliva Grass that he obtained through the auction, Lin Ming needed 2 more rare materials: a Heaven-Devouring Snake Ballbladder and Primal Jade Quintessence. These 2 materials were originally within the Divine Runic Masters Guild's warehouse, so Lin Ming spent 600 million and 800 million points on each respectively to exchange for them. As for the 9 Sun Jades he needed to pay, Lin Ming replaced those with points. After buying all the materials he needed, Lin Ming still had over 4 billion points remaining. Lin Ming didn't waste these points. He exchanged them for massive piles of other precious materials from the Divine Rune Masters Guild. Whenever the Divine Rune City auction came around, the Divine Runic Masters Guild's warehouse would be at its richest state and have the most pills and treasures available. This was because innumerable influences would arrive from all over the inner Asura Road and would exchange their materials and treasures for points. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Lin Ming was able to purchase any material that he took a liking to. He was able to contact other people to find any materials that he wanted. Some people weren't willing to exchange their treasures for points yet, so in this situation Lin Ming would pay over 20% higher than the market price in points to purchase materials from them. Lin Ming didn't mind these extra costs. Many of these materials weren't available at normal times. Once this hectic period passed, it would be some time before he encountered them again. In 7 days, Lin Ming spent most of the 4 billion some points he had. In the end, he only had several 100 million points remaining. With these 4 billion points, Lin Ming also purchased an Asura command that allowed him to travel through the Asura Road. With this Asura command, whether it was leaving the Asura Road or entering the inner and outer Asura Road, it would be much easier for him. In addition, Lin Ming also bought another material needed to refine the pill to open the 3rd Dao Palace at Twine Life Thunder Crystal. Seeing Primordius Heavenly Palace packed to the brim with materials, Lin Ming was pleased with himself. These materials would last for a long time. His road of body transformation would be paved with these materials. Of course, it was still too early for refining the ravenous wolf heaven pill required to open the second Dao Palace. Lin Ming first needed to complete the 1000 improved heavenly fire symbols and heretical god symbols. To him, this was a chance to challenge and temper himself. After completing this task, whether it was his comprehension of the Asura heavenly Dao or his soul force, both would be greatly enhanced. With that, he would be more confident in refining a ravenous wolf heaven pill. Brilliant arcs of light flashed through the dim divine runic room. Lin Ming's hands swam through the void, leaving behind beautiful traces of light that seemed as enchanting as flowers. Little by little, tiny runes filled with the power of thunder and fire began to shimmer into existence, novel being at. In the divine runic room, all of Lin Ming's soul force was concentrated on drawing up his heretical god symbol. Around him, time seemed to lose all meaning. Beside him, Xiao Moxian was paying attention to Lin Ming as she meditated. During these years, Xiao Moxian's cultivation had far outstripped Lin Ming's progress. As he was spending his time on the divine runic arts, her cultivation boundary was already nearing the late divine lord realm. Practicing the divine runic arts would inevitably influence Lin Ming's cultivation slightly. Although the divine runic arts were greatly beneficial to Lin Ming's soul force and understandings of the Asura laws, soul force and comprehension of laws didn't directly increase one's cultivation. The entire divine runic room was filled with a faint light. Traces of thunder and fire flooded the room, filling it with a mystical aesthetic sense. The tiny runes were drawn by Lin Ming one at a time. As he drew up the 1300th tiny rune, Lin Ming didn't notice that there was something in his spatial ring that was beginning to cast a strange light. This wisp of light carried with it a fresh and vibrant aura as it quietly mixed into Lin Ming's soul force. As Lin Ming was about to tie together two lines of glowing energy, the brilliantly dazzling energy in his hands was actually affected by this strange strength. It caused one of the lines of energy to bounce away and melt into one of the tiny runes. All of the tiny runes that Lin Ming drew up were infused with a tiny wisp of the power of thunder and fire. Underneath the influence of the Asura heavenly Dao laws, these two strengths were able to join together in a bizarre but marvelous balanced harmony. But with the sudden surge of this strength, this balance was immediately crushed apart. First, it was a tiny explosion that blew up in front of Lin Ming. A wild and chaotically imbalanced energy poured out, surging into the other runes. Soon after that, a horrifying chain reaction spread through the 1000 plus tiny runes. Bang! 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 Countless small explosions occurred, finally gathering into countless threads of thunder and fire that soared to the skies. Lin Ming dodged to the side as the shockwaves swept over him. Luckily, he was able to revolve his protective true essence in time so he wasn't injured in the explosion. Even Xiao Moxian, who was idling on the side, didn't have time to respond. Her cute face was soon covered with black soot. Lin Ming froze in place, not moving for a long time. What happened? For what reason was the energy uncontrollable just now? It was clear that he had everything under control just then. It seems that in the critical moment of the drawing process, a strange power inexplicably swelled forth and destroyed the balance of energy in the runes. Lin Ming earnestly recalled every step he took in drawing up the heretical god symbol. He racked his memories, trying to recall when an external strength had appeared and interfered with him. It was at this time that he felt a seething power emit from his spatial ring. Yes, it was this strength. He quickly opened his spatial ring and a vast and desolate aura rushed out like a broken dam. This aura was old and spiritual, it originated from that crystalline jade dragon horn. Since Lin Ming obtained it from the auction house, there hadn't been a single movement of the jade dragon horn. But currently, the sealing runes around the jade dragon horn were flickering, shining with a radiance like the gentle waves of the ocean. All of this light spread to a silent corner of the spatial ring. Lying at that location was a little ovoid-shaped object. Seeing this little thing, Lin Ming's pupils shrank. An astonished expression raced through his features. This pitch-black object was something he obtained from Empire Ian Primordius Cumrid in arms deep within the eternal demon abyss, the revered black dragon god beast. It was the black dragon egg. This black dragon egg needed a tremendous amount of strength before it was able to hatch. From time to time, Lin Ming would supply it with medicines, 9 sun jades, and spiritual energy. Unfortunately, even though this black dragon egg had absorbed a massive amount of spiritual energy, there still hadn't been the slightest response from it. He never imagined that today the jade dragon horn would cause the black dragon egg to beat. Tip: you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Martial World. Chapter 1650 Ancient Contract. Chapter 1650 Ancient Contract. Lin Ming's mind stirred. He took out the jade dragon horn and black dragon egg from his spatial ring. After he obtained the jade dragon horn, he had placed it in his spatial ring where he was momentarily keeping the black dragon egg. Because they were now in the same space, there was clearly some change that occurred because of the mutual attraction of their dragon race auras. The snow white dragon horn was the height of a person. But, when placed next to the dragon egg, it seemed the size of a dish. The pure black eggshell was covered with strange patterns that shifted between light and dark as if the egg were breathing. In the darkness, a soft luster formed from energy surrounded the dragon egg, forming a faint black halo. And beneath the dragon egg, the snow-white dragon horn was emitting a gentle white light. The sharp contrast of black and white was like a glossy black gem placed in snow. Big Brother Lin, I feel that. The jade dragon horn's dragon spirit has been stirred. It's likely resonating with the little thing in the black dragon egg. Xiao Moxian said from behind Lin Ming. In a daze, she walked forwards and stood in front of the jade dragon horn. Her eyes were misty as she looked at the jade dragon horn and peaceful black dragon egg. Her hands were lifted in the air, gently weaving through the glossy light emitting from the jade dragon horn, as if she were running her hands in the waters of a lake. It's true, it seems that the dragon spirit within the jade dragon horn is slowly gathering into the dragon egg, Xiao Moxian dreamily whispered. Lin Ming closed his eyes, also feeling the same thing. The dragon spirit within the jade dragon horn was an extremely incomplete and flawed soul. It lacked nearly any sense of self. It was only because of the contract that it was controlled by the master of the dragon contract. Now, although the little being in the black dragon egg wasn't able to control the dragon contract, it seemed as if it was relying on the unique relationship between members of the dragon race to slowly absorb the ancient dragon spirit from the dragon contract. And, this ancient dragon spirit didn't seem to resist at all. Lin Ming linked his divine sense with the dragon contract and seemed to sense a faintly sad and depressing atmosphere. Lin Ming had the dragon race bloodline in his body and this allowed him to faintly communicate with the ancient dragon spirit. He could feel its hopelessness and sorrow. Because the ancient dragon spirit was extremely incomplete, it lacked almost any sense of consciousness. But, it still had its instinct. Hundreds of millions of years ago, it had been caged within the jade dragon horn. Sealed by an ancient contract, it had become nothing but a contract puppet. Time had passed, 100 million years and then another hundreds million years, repeating again and again. It had gone through many masters and had even gone into dormancy deep in the depths of ancient ruins. It had traveled through multiple universes and had taken countless lives. But no matter how long the lifespan of a divine dragon was, the end of its existence had finally neared. It had transformed into pure soul energy, but even so it was imprisoned by the contract. It was still regarded as a puppet without a mind of its own, used as a killing tool for its ever-changing masters to fight again and again. This type of life left the dragon spirit feeling endless sadness and despair. And now, a familiar bloodline relation of its people was calling to it, summoning it. Without any resistance at all, the dragon spirit allowed itself to be summoned. For this dragon spirit, rather than being imprisoned forever in this contract, forever unable to reincarnate, allowing itself to become a part of this new life was actually a kind of salvation. Lin Ming closed his eyes for a long time. After several hours passed, he finally opened them. Amongst the god beasts, their bloodlines were few and far between. In order to survive, it was much easier for them to trust each other than to trust a human. Humans fighting amongst each other was a common occurrence. In fact, within the great 33 heavens, whether it was mortals or martial artists of any race, countless lives perished every year. At novel being at. To struggle for resources, to fight because of grudges, to rob others, innumerable reasons led to the extermination of innumerable lives. But god beasts would not do this in most situations. This was because their numbers were far too few. If they fought amongst themselves, it was likely they would all become extinct. At this time, more and more gentle light emitted from the jade dragon horn. In the void of the divine runic room, the light transformed into a shimmering white dragon. In the midst of this glorious light, an untold number of strange dragon-shaped marks and even life essence began flowing towards the black dragon egg. This was the essence of the dragon spirit that had been sealed in the dragon contract for an unknown number of years. In a sense, it was a type of inheritance. This was the purest form of its life essence, containing all of its talent, supernatural powers, and so forth. Lin Ming watched quietly. After a full day passed, the light of the dragon egg began to gradually dim down, and the pulsating lights on the dragon egg also disappeared. The strength of the dragon spirit had completely fused into the black dragon egg, seeming as if nothing had occurred. Lin Ming silently waited as all of this happened. Even the drawing of the divine runic symbols was momentarily postponed. He was extremely patient. This black dragon egg was his contract beast and their spirits and lives were linked together. He could feel that after absorbing the dragon spirit, the black dragon egg was undergoing a tremendous series of changes. To hatch a true dragon, that was absolutely an unfathomably vast project. Even under the nourishment of countless heavenly materials and limitless amounts of heaven and earth origin energy, this was still a process that required tens of thousands of years. But now, with the ancient dragon spirit fusing its essence into the black dragon egg, this greatly reduced the time it needed to incubate. At the same time, the life essence, talent, and supernatural powers that entered the dragon egg accelerated its growth. Once it hatched, it would definitely be far more powerful than Xiao Moxian's hungry big yellow, a Taotai god beast. Time slowly passed, a breath at a time. Slowly, over the surface of the black dragon egg, a dazzling and mystical line appeared. Then another strange and shimmering line appeared. As these radiant lines slowly appeared, the pitch-black dragon egg became crystalline and translucent. Lin Ming could even faintly hear a small whisper from within the dragon egg, as slight and imperceptible as dust falling in the wind. After that, vaguely, the outline of a little baby dragon appeared from within the glowing dragon egg, flitting in and out of sight, indistinct and hidden. It was slowly absorbing the power of the dragon spirit like drinking from a trickling stream. Lin Ming could see at first glance that absorbing the ancient dragon spirit wasn't something that could be accomplished in a single day. Rather, it would take a long time as the process slowly occurred. This was just like a small little bug eating a massive cake. After finishing eating and then also absorbing other heavenly materials, just what boundary would this little baby black dragon reach? The life fluctuations of the black dragon egg began to die down as it changed back to its previous appearance. The only differences were the traces of life marked on the outside of the dragon egg. They still emitted a luminescent light. This was clearly showing the pulse of life within. It seems it will need a much longer time before it can hatch. Lin Ming gazed at the black dragon egg, satisfied with what he saw. He would allow that little life to slowly digest the power of the dragon spirit. At this time he had to do his best not to disturb the black dragon egg. He also understood the common saying that one shouldn't try to run before they could walk. This needed to be a progressive, gradual process. Just as he put the black dragon egg and jade dragon horn in his spatial ring, there was the thumping of a knock on his door. Who had come at this time? Lin Ming wasn't happy to be disturbed while he was drawing up divine runic symbols. Xiao Moxian frowned and opened the door. They could see two old men with strange smiles on their faces standing at the entrance. Beside them were two young divine runic masters. They were clearly apprentices. Who are you? Xiao Moxian swept her eyes over them, her vision catching on their divine runic badges. Their divine runic badges were not in the style of Divine Rune City, so they clearly weren't divine runic masters of the Divine Runic Masters Guild. We felt a chaotic energy just now. It seems that the eyes of one of the old divine runic masters looked over Xiao Moxian and swept through the divine runic room. As he saw the messy and chaotic scene, he knew that a considerably large explosion had occurred just now. Even the array discs might have been damaged. It seems that there was an explosion. Is Sir Lin safe? A tall and thin old man asked. Although he had a smile, one could clearly hear the anxiety and worry in his voice. The other old man was short and fat. Although he didn't speak, his distraught expression spoke more than enough for him. These two people had clearly felt the strange fluctuations of energy in the air. You are not from the Divine Runic Masters Guild, Xiao Moxian frowned. Just where did these two old fellows come from? Why were they here? I am Zhao Chang, a Divine Runic Master from the Minor Violet Holy Lands. Before, Hadden Serlin said that he would hand over the completed heretical god symbols every few months. Thus, Empire Ian Minor Violet sent us here to be responsible for this matter and to lend any aid that we can. If there is any matter that you need help with, please feel free to look for us. We will do our best to help you in any manner we can. Divine Runic Master Zhao spoke with a close and friendly tone. As he spoke, he continued to sweep his sense across the Divine Runic room, trying to get a grasp of Lin Ming's progress on the heretical god symbols. Xiao Moxian was stunned for a moment before she recovered. It seemed that Empire Ian Minor Violet didn't trust them too much and had sent several supervisors to keep an eye on them. This caused Xiao Moxian to feel extremely uncomfortable. Her eyebrows twitched and she nearly slammed the door shut. But at this time, Lin Ming stopped her and smiled at the two old Divine Runic Masters as he said, please rest assured, I will turn in Divine Runic symbols every 3 months, on time. As for this Divine Runic room, the sound insulating array formation is quite good and it's nearly impossible for the fluctuations of energy from an explosion to escape. Two sirs, perhaps you were living in the room next door. Lin Ming smiled, chuckling a little. He didn't mind that Empire Ian Minor Violet had sent these supervisors to watch over him. To be honest, if he were in Empire Ian Minor Violet's position, he would absolutely send people to keep a close eye on matters. After all, this was a total of 5 billion points added with a 2 billion point dragon saliva grass, and all of this was traded for a promissory note. How could Empire Ian Minor Violet not be anxious about this? Lin Ming's words left the two old Divine Runic Masters blushing red with embarrassment. Indeed, they were assigned to monitor him at all hours, every day. It wasn't much different from having moved a bench right outside the door of his room. However, they couldn't disturb Lin Ming as he was drawing up divine runic symbols, so they didn't have the chance to enter his room. It was only with this explosion that they took this opportunity to see the progress of his work. Tip, you can use left, right, and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Martial World. Chapter 1651 Attention of Peers. Chapter 1651 Attention of Peers. The two old divine runic masters idled at the door for some time, clearly wanting to go in and sit. But Lin Ming didn't share this intention at all. After a brief conversation, he quickly came up with an excuse that he had to hurry up with the divine runic symbols and closed the door. Looking at the closed door, the two old men glanced at each other with dismay. They were also people with status, and yet they had to spend their days here guarding the door of a junior. But there wasn't anything they could do about it. Besides Lin Ming, who else could draw up the improved heavenly fire symbol and heretical god symbol? Even Empire Ian Minor Violet had taken an extreme liking towards Lin Ming's divine runic symbols and would occasionally ask about them. The situation doesn't seem too good, the tall old man said, stroking his beard. Although they didn't enter the room, they were still able to vaguely get a sense of his progress. During these past several days, Lin Ming didn't seem to have made any headway in the production of the divine runic symbols and instead seemed to have caused some explosions in his room. That brief accident just now was not just an ordinary failure, it might have been a problem with the creation of the energy structure. When Shadow Overflow had tried to copy Lin Ming's divine runic symbol, it had also been a problem with the energy structure that had caused the entire divine runic symbol to collapse. This left them both feeling worried. Was there a problem in drawing up the heretical god symbols? If so, would Lin Ming be able to finish the task on time? In fact, it wasn't just these two old fellows that were paying attention to this. After the Divine Rune City auction ended, many Divine Runic Masters had yet to leave. They often visited the Divine Runic Masters Guild, hoping to observe the heretical god symbol and the improved heavenly fire symbol. Originally, this sort of request was a bit outrageous. After all, these two Divine Runic symbols involved a great deal of secrets. If the Divine Runic Masters Guild refused, they wouldn't have anything to say about the matter. But what surprised them was that these requests were actually not refused by Song Wen. All Divine Runic Masters, as long as they applied, could examine the heretical god symbol and heavenly fire symbol for 3 days. But in order to apply there was a condition: Divine Runic Masters had to exchange some of their attainments. In other words, some of their skills and secret techniques in drawing up Divine Runic symbols. When Song Wen put forth these requests, even old Xiu had to clap his hands in praise. Old Xiu couldn't help but sigh in his heart. Although this Song Wen normally seemed like some virtuous and magnanimous character, the truth was that he was a dirty bucket of water filled with tricks. As for old Xiu himself, he was the opposite. Although he seemed crafty and greedy on the surface, when it came to his own benefits he was honest with his bottom line. This led to Song Wen having a good reputation with everyone referring to him as a gentleman. In truth, Song Wen was only a miser that took advantages of others. As for old Xiu, he had a poor reputation. Many people called him an old dog, but old Xiu had never truly taken advantage of others. However, old Xiu knew that wanting to copy the improved heavenly fire symbol and heretical god symbol was impossible. The past results of Shadow Overflow were the best example of this. Even if they lent out these divine runic symbols for other divine runic masters to examine and research, they wouldn't be able to produce any results. On the other hand, with these divine runic masters exchanging their attainments to the Divine Runic Masters Guild, the Divine Runic Masters Guild would have tremendous benefits. After all, every divine runic master would have different discoveries and experiences when drawing up a divine runic symbol. For instance, if 100 divine runic masters were to draw up a heavenly fire symbol, there would be 100 different techniques. Even though the main runic structure was the same, the subtle differences between them were infinitely varied. Absorbing the experience of a single divine runic master wasn't much at all, but if one could absorb the experiences of many divine runic masters, that was a highly valuable asset. The truth was that most of these divine runic masters were well aware that it was impossible for them to unravel the heretical god symbol and the improved heavenly fire symbol. Even though they had no hope of unraveling it, they still wanted to experience it and study it themselves. These two divine runic symbols had a soaring fame in the outer world. Even though many divine runic masters knew this was a trap, they still willingly leapt into it. This was the craziness caused by one's curiosity and enthusiasm towards the divine runic arts. For many divine runic masters, even just looking at the heretical god symbol had them feeling satisfied. More and more divine runic masters came and exchanged their attainments for the chance to look over the heretical god symbol and improved heavenly fire symbol. However, as more and more people studied these two divine runic symbols and even conducted research on them, they came to a horrifying conclusion. That was that the degree of difficulty in drawing up these two divine runic symbols had reached a terrifying level. Just looking at the tiny runes that comprised the structure of the divine runic symbol, there were 2,000 to 3,000 of them. They feared that even if they knew all the techniques needed to draw these two divine runic symbols and also knew how to fuse together the Asura Heavenly Dao, if they wanted to draw these divine runic symbols themselves, the difficulty would likely be several times greater than that of an ordinary 6th grade divine runic symbol. It was hard to imagine just how Lin Ming had completed one. As they all remembered that Lin Ming said he would complete 500 heretical god symbols within 3 years, all of them felt that this was unbelievable. This was simply a mind-boggling workload. If Lin Ming couldn't complete the 500 heavenly fire symbols within 3 years, then Empire Lianheart wouldn't say anything. After all, at the time, Empire Lianheart hadn't placed a condition on Lin Ming to complete the 500 improved heavenly fire symbols within 3 years. But Empire Lian Minor Violet was different. If Lin Ming wasn't able to fulfill the promissory note on time, then the points he obtained would be taken back. For a time, many divine runic masters focused their attention on the Divine Runic Masters Guild. These miraculous divine runic symbols left their hearts itching with desire and not wanting to leave. Much less, Divine Rune City was considered a holy land of divine runic masters. With so many divine runic masters gathered here, they could share and exchange their knowledge. To these long-lived people, 3 years wasn't anything at all. They would rather stay here and see if Lin Ming could finish this intimidating task. But Lin Ming secluded himself in his divine runic room, not allowing anyone to enter. During these days, there were no more movements of the Black Dragon Egg. Lin Ming invested all of his focus into drawing up the divine runic symbols. His hands cut through the void, leaving behind lines of glowing energy. Time passed like sand in the wind, unknowingly marching by. At the start, Lin Ming didn't have any problems drawing up the heavenly fire symbol. But concerning the heretical god symbol, the process was still as slow as before. One after another, several small incidents occurred. Luckily, after Xiao Moxian was left covered in soot due to the black dragon egg incident, she had kept her guard up so all troubles were quickly resolved. After that, Lin Ming became increasingly skilled in his drawing process. 1 month. 2 months. 3 months. The discarded materials piled up as high as hills. But during this process, Lin Ming became increasingly skilled and familiar with drawing up the improved heavenly fire symbol and heretical god symbol. He accurately captured all of the small changes in the energy patterns between the lines. Slowly, Lin Ming finally became able to draw up 2 complete heavenly fire symbols in one day. His success rate in a situation where he was conserving his soul force had reached 99%. As for the more difficult heretical god symbol, Lin Ming's success rate was only 80-some%. Moreover, he could draw at most 1 a day. This led Lin Ming to make a decision. He would spend the majority of his energy drawing up the improved heavenly fire symbols and through this process constantly enhance the level of his divine runic arts. As for the heretical god symbol, he would leave that on the back burner until his skill in the divine runic arts reached a certain level. Once he could guarantee a 95% success rate, he would then start drawing them up en masse. Doing this would save the most time. And at this moment, the divine runic masters from Minor Violet Heavenly Palace that were keeping guard outside of Lin Ming's divine runic room felt a bit restless. During this long period of time, Lin Ming hadn't come out to hand over any divine runic symbols. This left them feeling weak at heart. Finally, Zhao Chang couldn't help but knock on Lin Ming's door. Xiao Moxian frowned. First she confirmed that Lin Ming hadn't been disturbed, then she laid down an isolating array formation before she opened the front door with a dark and gloomy face. Facing Xiao Moxian's eerie face that was illuminated by the dim light and the murderous gaze in her eyes, Zhao Chang stiffened and awkwardly coughed several times. He slowly explained, "Fairy Maiden Xiao Moxian, we are here to receive the divine runic symbols." At the time, Sir Lin said to Empire Ian Minor Violet at the auction that he would deliver what he had completed every 3 months. Zhao Chang spoke with an upbeat and warm tone, as if he were trying to flatter Xiao Moxian. Upon hearing this, Xiao Moxian remembered that Lin Ming had indeed said this. Pulling her ear for a moment, Xiao Moxian walked back inside and took out the completed heretical god symbols from a jade box on the divine runic table. Then, she handed them over to Zhao Chang. The stack was thin and light. After a quick count, there were only 10. This was because in order to save time Lin Ming decided to take things one step at a time. In a high-intensity drawing process, he would first start with the improved heavenly fire symbols to hone his craft further. As Zhao Chang looked at the mere 10 heretical god symbols in his hands, he nearly choked on himself and fainted. This is it. During these 3 months, Lin Ming had only drawn 10. Wasn't this far too slow? The promised deadline was 3 years. At this speed, in 3 years Lin Ming would only be able to draw 120. This was far away from the goal of 500. That's right, this is it. At the time I remember it was said that only completed divine runic symbols would be handed over, but it was never stated how many needed to be handed over per month, right? At novel bean at. Xiao Moxian rhetorically asked. Zhao Chang was speechless. Indeed, at the auction, Lin Ming only said he would turn in what he had completed every 3 months, but it was never stated how many would be turned in. The short and fat old man beside Zhao Chang couldn't help but remind Xiao Moxian, "Fairy Maiden Xiao Moxian, please remember that the agreement was that if the promissory note couldn't be fulfilled in 3 years, then the 5 billion points and dragon saliva grass must be returned." The short and fat old man kindly reminded as he felt that it would be difficult for Lin Ming to complete this task. After all, he too had studied the heretical god symbol created by Lin Ming and felt that even with his own ability, if Lin Ming were to teach him by hand how to draw up a heretical god symbol it would still not be easy at all. There would definitely be a high failure rate. To complete 500 in 3 years was a bit too imposing of a condition. After all, in his eyes, Lin Ming was still a youth, not much different from a little child. Although these 2 old men had a good character and spoke from the kindness of their heart, Xiao Moxian still didn't appreciate these 2 old fellows squatting in front of the door every day. She impatiently said, "Thank you for the advice, but please do not worry yourselves. It has only been 3 months, moreover, Big Brother Lin has more to draw up than the heretical god symbols, he still has to draw up the improved heavenly fire symbols." Improved heavenly fire symbols. Zhao Chang repeated, startled. There was trouble in completing the heretical god symbols and yet Lin Ming was still drawing up the improved heavenly fire symbols. He felt that Xiao Moxian had the heart and manner of a child and liked to mindlessly boast. But, he had the good manners and heart not to break apart her little act. He once again kindly reminded her, the heavenly fire symbols don't seem to have a deadline. Perhaps it might be better to focus on the heretical god symbols alone for these 3 years. Sure. Xiao Moxian simply didn't have the interest or patience to keep on bantering with these 2 old men. She mumbled a response and then slammed the door shut. The two old men jumped back as their faces were almost struck by the stone door. They couldn't help but glance at each other in dismay. Tip, you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Martial World. Chapter 1652 Task Complete. Chapter 1652 Task Complete. Why is that little girl so angry? The two old men were somewhat depressed. It was rare for a junior to treat them like this. After such a cold reception they were really at a loss for words. She is complaining that we are staying out here and disturbing her. The other old man bitterly smiled. To squat outside one's door every day, it wasn't strange to arouse someone's disgust and annoyance. If it weren't for this being Empire Ian Minor Violet's personal command, they wouldn't be willing to squat at the door like some beggars. Ling Ling seems to have pushed himself too far. I have no idea if it's really like that little girl said, and he's investing a massive amount of energy in the improved heavenly fire symbols. At the time, Empire Ian Leonhardt hadn't stipulated any deadline, so as long as Ling Ming isn't foolish he shouldn't take on too great a burden. Ling Ming's not an idiot. Empire Ian Leonhardt isn't facing a war anytime soon, so he has no urgent need for the divine runic symbols. To him, it shouldn't matter if it's 3 years or 5 years. My gut feeling tells me that there was a problem in the drawing process. That heretical god symbol alone has 3,000 some tiny runes, enough to even cause a 6th grade divine runic master to feel fear at heart, so how could it be easy to draw up? Perhaps the previous explosion was because there was a problem with the runic structure. We can only hope that Ling Ling managed to solve the problem. As these two old men continued deliberating, they passed these mere 10 divine runic symbols to a messenger from the Minor Violet Holy Lands, who passed through numerous channels to deliver them to Empire Ian Minor Violet. In 3 months, Empire Ian Minor Violet had only received 10 divine runic symbols. This small amount caused her to slightly frown. However, it was only slightly frowning. She didn't say much, only commanding that all the divine runic symbols be delivered to her every 3 months. Lin Ming delivering 10 heretical god symbols in 3 months wasn't a secret at all. In addition, with the numerous people who were paying attention to Lin Ming, this news soon spread. If he spent 3 months to complete 10 divine runic symbols, how could he possibly complete 500 in 3 years? These people couldn't help but gossip quietly amongst themselves. Although Lin Ming was young, no one dared to underestimate him. At the Divine Rune City auction he had obtained 10 billion points in just half a month. Whether it was in terms of will or mentality, he was absolutely top-notch. Since he had dared to make a promise that he would be able to fulfill the promissory note of 500 heretical god symbols in 3 years, he had to have some assurance in doing so. After all, if his confident promise at the time was just an act, the future price he would have to pay would be dreadful. Plus, everyone felt that Lin Ming's slow speed in drawing up heretical god symbols was likely because some accident had occurred. If he could solve this problem, then he might be able to increase his speed. But if he didn't manage to do so, then he would truly lose everything. This news left many divine runic masters that were on good terms with Lin Ming worried for him. For instance, Old Xiu and Old Su were both fretting over his problems. But there were also many others taking this chance to gloat. They wanted Lin Ming to fail. The materials had been paid for using Lin Ming's money, and if he were forced to pay back the 5 billion points and dragon saliva grass he earned, that would truly be tragic. Old Su and Old Xiu discussed the situation with each other. They figured that Lin Ming should have encountered some problem in the first 3 months that he wasn't able to solve for the time being. After the first 3 months, his speed should have increased some more. But they never imagined that after 6 months of time, Lin Ming would only hand over 3 more heretical god symbols. This left many people speechless. How come he would turn in less each time? Good heavens. Old Xiu and Old Su were no longer able to sit still. This was not just Lin Ming's problem but something that involved the honor and reputation of the Divine Runic Masters Guild. The 3 kinds of Divine Runic symbols that Lin Ming invented were his brand and also the brand of the Divine Runic Masters Guild. Slowly, the Divine Runic Masters that had gathered at the Divine Runic Masters Guild from all over the Asura Road felt the situation becoming more interesting. This youth had spent half a month to gather 10 billion points and had made a great show of things. If he wasn't able to fulfill his promises and lost everything, then the miracle of that time would turn into nothing but a joke. After 9 months, Lin Ming only delivered slightly more heretical god symbols, 5 of them. When placed against the total requirement of 500, this was nothing but a drop of water in a bucket. Time passed a day at a time. Lin Ming was deep in seclusion and didn't leave. The divine runic symbols he completed were handed over to Xiao Moxian for processing. Lin Ming focused all of his heart and mind on drawing up the divine runic symbols and declined all disturbances. No one knew that at this time, Lin Ming had already been able to draw up 3 improved heavenly fire symbols in 1 day and his success rate had risen to 100%. With his current soul force and control of the Asura laws, Lin Ming believed that if he were to stop drawing up the heavenly fire symbols now and immediately start on the heretical god symbols, his success rate would be above 95%. During these 9 months, Lin Ming had already completed 390 improved heavenly fire symbols and had just a bit more than 100 left to do. He could complete that in a little more than a month. Then, 10 months passed. Halfway through the 11th month, Lin Ming completed all improved heavenly fire symbols. All 500 heavenly fire symbols had been perfectly drawn up. Following that, Lin Ming's divine runic arts had risen to another level. With this experience at his back, he started his work on the heretical god symbols. With the warm-up of the heavenly fire symbols, it had become far easier for Lin Ming to draw up the heretical god symbols. From 1 a day at the start, after becoming more familiar with the process, he began to draw up 3 every 2 days. In over 40 days, Lin Ming drew up more than 50 heretical god symbols. With this, the 12th month had passed. An entire year had quietly slipped by. The end of the 12th month also signaled the receiving of the completed divine runic symbols. As many people thought that Lin Ming would complete heretical god symbols in the single digits, when Xiao Moxian took out the jade box and opened it, she actually revealed a thick stack of heretical god symbols within. Zhao Chang was stunned as he saw this. He quickly counted the heretical god symbols and noticed there were 52 of them. With a brief probing of his soul force, he could see that all of these were completed heretical god symbols. How come Lin Ming had handed over 3 and 5 divine runic symbols, but now there were suddenly 52 divine runic symbols? Did Lin Ming finally manage to draw around 1 every 2 days? At novel bean at. As this news spread throughout the Divine Runic Masters Guild, Old Su and Old Xiu were overjoyed. There was finally some good news about Lin Ming. However, a speed of drawing up 1 every 2 days still wasn't enough to complete 500 of them in the time left. They could only hope that Lin Ming would increase his speed yet again in the next 2 years. Only like this would he have hopes of completing the 500. Old Xiu held on to this hope. But, he never imagined that after another 3 months, Lin Ming would give them all another heaven-shaking surprise. It had to be known that when Lin Ming drew up the 52 divine runic symbols, he had only used a month and a half to do so. The first half of the 3 months had been spent on drawing up improved heavenly fire symbols. However, during the next 3 months, Lin Ming was spending the entire time span to do so. He invested all of his concentration in it, only thinking of drawing up heretical god symbols. Thus, during these 3 months, Lin Ming drew up a total of 135 heretical god symbols. He had drawn up 2 divine runic symbols every 3 days, no more, no less. When Xiao Moxian handed over these divine runic symbols, Zhao Chang was left dumbfounded for a long time. How come there are so many? To hand over 135 all of a sudden, this was over twice the total amount of all the heretical god symbols he had handed in before. Is it not good to turn in too many? Xiao Moxian asked. She urged Zhao Chang to hurry up and inspect the goods. Zhao Chang shook his head and regained his composure. He swept his sense through the heretical god symbols and saw that there was no problem with any of them. How had Lin Ming drawn all of these? As Zhao Chang was lost in thought, he dazedly passed the 135 heretical god symbols to headquarters. As this news spread, Old Su and Old Xiu were ecstatic. As for many other divine runic masters, they were left perplexed. Lin Ming had handed over heretical god symbols a total of 5 times. The first time he turned in 10, the second time 3, the third time 5, and the 4th time was the most normal at 52. But the 5th time, he actually handed in a ridiculous number of 135. Could Lin Ming have been deliberately holding back some divine runic symbols the first year? And then for some reason he decided to hand them over now. Many people had this thought. This was also the most reasonable explanation. Otherwise, to complete 135 heretical god symbols in 3 months, that was simply unbelievable. Up until now, Lin Ming had completed 205 heretical god symbols in 15 months. If this number was averaged out, that would be around 13 to 14 completed every month. This was a perfectly acceptable number. Even so, at this speed, it would still be extremely tight if Lin Ming wanted to complete 500 divine runic symbols in 3 years. It felt as if he were gasping for time. Whether or not he could complete the task would depend on how many divine runic symbols Lin Ming would turn in the next time. Time quickly passed. Soon, 6 months passed during the 2nd year. It was time again for the delivery of divine runic symbols. And this time, when Xiao Moxian took out the divine runic symbols, Zhao Chang's chin nearly hit the ground. She took out 145 at once. With this, Lin Ming had now delivered 350 heretical god symbols. He was only 150 away from 500. Everyone didn't even have the time to digest this news or to figure out how Lin Ming had managed to draw up 145 heretical god symbols in 3 months. And following this, after the 9th month of the 2nd year passed, Lin Ming directly left seclusion and handed over the remaining 150 divine runic symbols. With this, Lin Ming completely fulfilled his promissory note to Empire Ian Minor Violet. As Lin Ming stepped out of his room, his appearance was a bit haggard and exhausted. As Zhao Chang and the other old man saw him, they were both left panic-stricken. In their eyes, this young man in front of them was no different from a monstrous freak. The original deadline was 3 years, but Lin Ming had used a year and 9 months to complete it. As for the difficulty of the heretical god symbol, the two old fellows had a deep understanding of it. There were over 3,000 tiny runes and innumerable connections and combinations between them. Just looking at the possibilities gave one a headache. Even for a 6th grade divine runic master, their soul force might not be enough to complete the task. Moreover, the more and more soul force he used up, the higher the chances of failure became. How had Lin Ming accomplished all of this? As this news spread out, the divine runic masters in Divine Rune City were all left startled. In particular, those hoping for Lin Ming to fail and lose all the money he had used to purchase materials were left absolutely flummoxed. However, they still had a great question in their minds. Lin Ming was clearly able to complete 500 heretical god symbols in a year and 9 months, so in the first 9 months, why had he only turned in such a small number of divine runic symbols every time? Tip: you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters.
I need to go back. Feel my wrath. I'm injured. Our just reward.
Martial World. Chapter 1653 Celebration Banquet. Chapter 1653 Celebration Banquet. This time, Lin Ming hadn't handed over many heretical god symbols at the start, instead handing them all in near the end. This was a slap in the face for the divine runic masters who had doubted him. In the early part of the first year when Lin Ming had only handed in divine runic symbols in the single digits, many divine runic masters gossiped and said that Lin Ming would definitely be unable to complete the task. There were even some people who said that if Lin Ming could finish his task, they would eat their own divine runic tables like steamed buns. But in the end, Lin Ming had taken a year and 9 months to complete the task. Without a doubt, this left all of his detractors' faces swollen red from shame. In their deep mortification they began to curse Lin Ming and say that he was putting on an act. If he could clearly complete them early, why would he wait until the final several months to turn them in? If this wasn't putting on a show, what was? But, although these divine runic masters cursed Lin Ming in their heart, they still understood that Lin Ming's ability to draw up divine runic symbols far surpassed their imaginations. Towards someone this young but with such an absurdly high level of talent in the divine runic arts, those people that openly gossiped about him decided to take a new approach to the current situation. They decided to scurry away. If they had offended someone like this, wouldn't it be better to just hide? As these people were mulling over leaving Divine Rune City, the Divine Runic Masters Guild was holding a massive celebration banquet. One reason was to celebrate Lin Ming's completion of his task, and another reason was to propagandize the successes of the Divine Runic Masters Guild so that more Divine Runic Masters would join them, causing Divine Rune City to grow even stronger. Lin Ming originally had no interest in attending this celebration banquet, but after Song Wen repeatedly requested his presence and said that it was for the future of the Divine Runic Masters Guild, Lin Ming decided to take up the offer. He allowed them to do as they wished. Before the celebration banquet began, all sorts of celebrities in the world of Divine Runic Masters began to converge. All of them wanted to experience the magnificent style and elegance of this new legendary Divine Runic Master. Someone like Lin Ming, who had a limitless future in front of them, was simply a spirit treasure in human form. There were countless influences that wanted to win him over, but he had declined all guests during his seclusion. Since these influences didn't have the opportunity to meet him before, they certainly wouldn't miss the chance at this celebration banquet. For a time, all sorts of people surrounded Lin Ming. These celebrities of the inner Asura Road greeted him, wanting to get on good terms with him. This was a scene that Suya definitely wouldn't miss out on. However, she wasn't the only bright spot on the field. Even though she put on her eternally sexy and captivating clothes, she still couldn't cover up the light of the other girls. In the center of the field there was no shortage of proud beauties from many different great influences. These women all came in their own styles. Some were cute and lovable, some were pure and ethereal, some were exploding from their clothes, and no matter which beautiful young woman it was, Suya didn't necessarily surpass them. And after Lin Ming arrived, he became the focus of all these young ladies' whiles. Grandmaster Lin Ming, you are far too fierce. I've been studying the Divine Runic Arts for more than 10 years, but I'm still only just a little first-grade Divine Runic Master. But Grandmaster Lin Ming doesn't seem much older than me, yet your Divine Runic Arts are skilled enough to transform classic versions of Divine Runic symbols. You can establish your own sect and begin your own inheritance. When my grandpa returned from Divine Rune City, he had nothing but endless praise for Grandmaster Lin Ming. A young girl with snow-white skin and shimmering bright eyes breathily said. Her long dark hair fell down her shoulders like an inky waterfall, and as she spoke to Lin Ming her vision was filled with an alluring charm. As she lifted a glass of wine in her hands, her pale white hands contrasted with the deep red wine, seeming especially beautiful. The grandpa that she was mentioning was an Empire Ian Supreme Elder. Of course, an Empire Ian's granddaughter wasn't anything too great. After all, a General Empire Ian had far too many granddaughters. All descendants of Empire Ians had to rely on their own abilities, and it was quite good for her to become a first-grade Divine Runic Master in 10 years. But to suddenly be referred to as Grandmaster Lin Ming had a strange expression come over his face. To think that he had inexplicably become a Grandmaster, it was quite bewildering. I am not a Grandmaster, just refer to me by my name, novel being at. In my eyes you are a Grandmaster. I wonder, if you have any free time, perhaps you could direct my divine runic arts. The young girl said, her face blushing red. Just as she was about to speak again, an old man with silver hair approached Lin Ming. This old man wore purple robes and his white hair was frizzy like needles that stuck up from his head. His aura was restrained and his eyes were sharp. Lin Ming could see that he was a master at first glance. Half-step Empire Ian. Lin Ming was surprised as he rapidly made this judgment. A half-step Empire Ian, no matter where they were, was considered a formidable existence. Even in Divine Rune City where masters were like clouds, there weren't many half-step Empire Ians. Little friend Lin, haha. I have already been hearing your famous name for quite some time. Since we can meet like this today, allow me to introduce myself. I am the Vice Palace Master of Leonhardt Heavenly Palace. The reason I came this time is on behalf of Empire Ian Leonhardt, the Vice Palace Master of an Empire Ian influence. Lin Ming was startled. This sort of status was quite exaggerated. Compared to the Vice President of the Divine Runic Masters Guild, it was only slightly worse. As the old man introduced himself he quickly caught the attention of many people. He smiled and said, "Little friend Lin, allow an old man to raise a cup to you." Before this I was worried that the Palace Master's 500 improved heavenly fire symbols wouldn't be able to be fulfilled anytime soon, but now it seems I was overthinking matters. Really, even 500 heretical god symbols were completed by little friend Lin in just a year and 9 months. Then, drawing up the heavenly fire symbols shouldn't be a problem at all, ha ha ha. The old man heartily smiled, raising his wine glass to Lin Ming. As for Lin Ming, after a brief moment of surprise he suddenly said, "If the Leonhardt Holy Lands want the 500 improved heavenly fire symbols, I have already finished drawing them. If senior wishes then I can fulfill the promissory note now." Lin Ming's voice wasn't loud, but most of the martial artists in attendance were already paying attention to him and the silver-haired old man. They were able to clearly hear what they were saying. For a time, the loud and bustling party calmed down. Everyone looked at Lin Ming, stunned, not sure whether or not they could believe their own ears. The silver-haired man was bewildered. The wine glass in his hand also froze in midair. You finished 500 heavenly fire symbols, you've finished drawing them." The silver-haired old man's throat twitched. He found it difficult to speak. This old man's response confused Lin Ming. Was this so strange? He had originally promised a 3-year deadline and that was to complete both the heavenly fire symbols and heretical god symbols. If he hadn't finished them then why would he leave seclusion? Of course, his results were better than what he had imagined. In less than 2 years he had completed the 1000 divine runic symbols. Lin Ming was highly satisfied with his own speed. He lightly clinked his wine glass with the silver-haired old man's and said with a matter-of-course tone, "I've naturally finished drawing them otherwise I wouldn't have left seclusion. If I were to fall behind in drawing up the expensive divine runic symbols that a holy land purchased, I would simply have to work overtime, so how would I have the time to drink wine at this banquet?" Lin Ming thought that his own actions were quite normal. But, everyone present was left dumbfounded. It took them some time to regain their composure. Not too far away from Lin Ming, old Xiu was enjoying his 100,000-year spirit rhino wine, drinking down cup after cup. But as he heard Lin Ming's words, he nearly spat out all the wine in his mouth. In less than 2 years, Lin Ming had completed 500 heretical god symbols as well as casually completing the 500 improved heavenly fire symbols. When one considered the difficulty and time required to draw up these 2 divine runic symbols, this was simply unbelievable. The silver-haired old man licked his dry lips. "Little friend Lin, since when did you complete the 500 heavenly fire symbols that my holy lands purchased?" He asked this question because he had some slight suspicions that Lin Ming might have completed a portion of the heavenly fire symbols before the auction had begun. However, Lin Ming refuted this. He shook his head and said, "It was last year. I first drew up the heavenly fire symbols and after I completed them I began to draw up the heretical god symbols. After all, the heretical god symbol is a bit more difficult to draw up so it would be easier with the experience of drawing up 500 heavenly fire symbols before that. Fortunately, my success rate increased afterwards. Starting with something simple and then progressively going harder will naturally save more time. If the Leonhardt Holy Lands had requested that I hand over the completed heavenly fire symbols every 3 months then I would have handed them in then and there wouldn't have been a need to wait until now." As Lin Ming spoke, everyone suddenly recalled what happened last year. During the first year, Lin Ming had only completed an extraordinarily small number of heretical god symbols, sometimes even handing in single digits of completed ones. But in the second year, Lin Ming's speed of drawing up heretical god symbols rapidly increased. One time, he even handed in 150 of them. Originally, many people thought that Lin Ming had finished most of the heretical god symbols last year and only turned in the majority of them near the end. They assumed that Lin Ming was putting on some sort of show. But, they never imagined that Lin Ming simply hadn't been drawing up heretical god symbols at all, but had been focusing on drawing up heavenly fire symbols. As others were worrying over whether or not Lin Ming would be able to complete his task, he hadn't been worrying over this matter at all. Everyone's concern during the first year had simply been unnecessary. Rather, it could be said that when Lin Ming agreed to a 3-year deadline, he had factored additional time into the deadline. In fact, he had been referring to drawing up both divine runic symbols within the deadline. Lin Ming had put extra cushion room in his deadline in order to guarantee an escape route for himself. Many people froze as they realized all of this. For a time, none of them knew what expression to make. They felt that in front of Lin Ming, their thousands or tens of thousands of years of life had all been a waste. I see, so little friend Lin only needed less than a year to draw up the heretical god symbols. The silver-haired old man mumbled, his mind in jumbles. During the last 3 months Lin Ming had delivered a total of 150 heretical god symbols, all of them complete. He had used the whole 3 months to do this. In other words, he had been drawing up 5 divine runic symbols every 3 days. This degree of speed left many 6th grade divine runic masters red with shame. Little friend Lin, do you have those completed heavenly fire symbols with you? The silver-haired old man was particularly respectful with his tone. Lin Ming nodded and took out a jade box from his spatial ring. As he opened the jade box, a black-red flame slowly fluttered out, as if the jade box contained a mass of burning black flames. An incomparably pure energy surged out. Upon feeling this pure strength, even the silver-haired old man who didn't understand the divine runic arts too well knew that these heavenly fire symbols were all top quality. Seeing was believing. Even though everyone knew that Lin Ming wouldn't lie in this situation, as the 500 heavenly fire symbols appeared before them, this still left a considerable impact on their minds. Tip, you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Martial World. Chapter 1654 Soul Recovery Pill. Chapter 1654 Soul Recovery Pill. When Lin Ming took out the improved heavenly fire symbols in front of all the heroic elites at the celebration banquet, this caused them all to re-evaluate him with a different light in their eyes. Just when they thought Lin Ming was already strong, he always managed to show that he was even stronger than they imagined, leaving them all speechless. This celebration banquet continued deep into the night before it ended. With this, Lin Ming fulfilled his promissory notes of 1,000 divine runic symbols. As soon as the banquet ended, this news had already spread out wide into the city. As the many circles of divine runic masters learned of this, it was like a large boulder crashing into the world of divine runic arts, sending shockwaves rippling outwards. Of course, Lin Ming didn't bother with this. As soon as he returned from the banquet he locked himself back into his divine runic room. He had many other tasks to complete. Now that he had fulfilled the orders of improved heavenly fire symbols and heretical god symbols, he could begin to handle his own business. The first matter was to refine a soul recovery pill. This pill was to be made for Empire and Divine Mist, whose soul force was failing. If he were the Lin Ming of the past then he might not have had the confidence to create the soul recovery pill. Novel being at. But for the last 2 years he had been constantly drawing up improved heavenly fire symbols and heretical god symbols day and night. His skill in balancing intricate energy patterns as well as understanding the various changes in the Asura laws had reached a new level. Now, he was confident he had at least a 70% chance to successfully create the soul recovery pill. Creating a soul recovery pill consumed a massive amount of soul force. Moreover, there was an extremely strict environmental demand. The slightest fluctuation of outside energy could be catastrophic. After clearing up all of the waste materials in the divine runic room and cleaning it until it was shining, Lin Ming arranged a simple soul gathering array. Sitting in the center of this soul gathering array, Lin Ming began this massive project. He estimated he would need at least 10 days to refine this nearly transcendent divine pill into one that could have a significant effect on a Spiritas Empire Ian. Windbreak stone, resurrection grass, godcrow ball bladder. All sorts of materials were spread in front of him. Lin Ming opened the heretical god force. His right hand whistled as a wisp of heavenly tribulation fire burst to life. At the same time, Lin Ming stretched out his left hand. He revolved the bloodline in his body and a tiny wisp of life essence left in his body from Xiao Moxion burst out, forming a black nirvanic flame that rose from his left palm. In essence, nirvana was a heavenly tribulation that a phoenix had to undergo. If they failed in their nirvana, even a phoenix would perish. These two different flames shared a similar origin. They were both flames that were condensed from the heavenly downlaws and their grades were almost the same. The jet black flames twisted together with the blazing red flames, slowly spinning as they evolved into a strange array diagram in the array. The phantom of the heretical god tree appeared behind Lin Ming, and perched on this heretical god tree was a dark phoenix. In these scorching flames, Lin Ming revolved his comprehensions of alchemy to the limit. All sorts of materials were fed to the flames where they dissolved into liquids. From the start, Lin Ming didn't take this process lightly, nor did he dare to slack off. The soul force within his body gushed out like a wave, rushing into the furnace in front of him. Runes appeared in his hand, shining with a black light. Then, they fused into the furnace. Lin Ming kept absolute focus for 5 days and 5 nights. Because of the sweat that poured from his body being evaporated, a thin layer of salt appeared over his skin like frost. He maintained a high-intensity consumption of soul force until even he approached his limits. But at this time, the Nirvanic flames and heavenly tribulation flames in his hands suddenly extinguished themselves. From the furnace, a mystic pill appeared, filled with a bewildering power. This pill was jet black. All rays of light that neared this pill were dragged into it and cleanly absorbed. This was a semi-complete soul recovery pill. With Lin Ming's current ability, he still lacked the skills to complete the soul recovery pill in 1 session. Following this, Lin Ming rested for 2 days. Then, he used 3 days to produce the best medicinal divine runic symbol that he could and placed it atop the soul recovery pill. After finishing all of this, Lin Ming slumped back onto a stone chair, utterly exhausted. After a full 10 days, this soul recovery pill could be considered more or less complete. The pitch black soul recovery pill was placed in a jade box. Its surface was smoother than jade, and as one looked into its shiny depths, it made one feel as if their soul was falling into it. This was a pill with the demonic charm of a soul. If a person with an unsteady will and mind were to look at it, they could even fall into illusion. But even so, Lin Ming wasn't satisfied with this pill's effects. There were many places that had yet to achieve perfection, but this was also the best he could do within the constraints of his abilities. After all, it wasn't easy to produce a pill that an Empire Ian could use. However, Lin Ming couldn't wait. He had already been gone from Tragic Death Valley for nearly 30 years. According to the 10-1 time flow that occurred within Tragic Death Valley, nearly 300 years had passed there. Empire Ian Divine Mist must have inevitably weakened during this time. In a sense, it was fortunate that Empire Ian Divine Mist had weakened this much, because in his state even an imperfect soul recovery pill would have a wondrous effect on him. Lin Ming didn't leave his room yet. Instead, he stayed in the Divine Runic Room for another 1 to 2 months, producing another 50 heavenly fire symbols and 50 heretical god symbols. He took these divine runic symbols and went looking for Suya. Suya could be considered as having helped him. Moreover, Lin Ming had promised that he would help Suya. Lin Ming wasn't someone that liked owing anyone favors. Once he left the Divine Runic Masters Guild, there were many other matters he would have to complete. Not only did he have to return to Tragic Death Valley, but he had to find a place to refine the Ravenous Wolf Heaven Pill and break through the second Dao Palace in the 9 stars of the Dao Palace. After all of that was completed, there was still the final trial. But before doing all of this, Lin Ming wished to take care of unfinished business. Lin Ming and Xiao Moxian found Suya and handed the divine runic symbols to her. Suya was astonished, but she also had a faint feeling in her heart. "So Lin, are you planning on going on a long adventure?" Millimeter. Lin Ming nodded, not hiding anything from Suya. Suya sighed. "You are a dragon amongst humans. The Divine Runic Masters Guild isn't a place that can hold someone like you for long. But as for me, I must stay here. This war, if the Extreme Star Holy Lands win, then I will still stay at the Extreme Star Holy Lands until my old age. In the future, the most I'll be able to become is the Internal Affairs Envoy. And if we lose, then there is nothing to say. But no matter what happens and where our fates bring us, I'm afraid that our roads won't cross much." Suya didn't know why she had such a feeling. But, this feeling was quite accurate. Lin Ming remained silent. Suya was right. The most he would stay in the Asura Road was another 20 or so years. 20 years from now, after the final trial was complete, he would leave the Asura Road and return to the Divine Realm. The Divine Realm was Lin Ming's homeland. Lin Ming was well aware that the great calamity of humanity was bound to be tragic and fierce. Even if he was nothing but a little tree in this great calamity, unable to do anything at all, Lin Ming still had to return. Because the human race was Lin Ming's roots. Millimeter. I understand. Please, take care. Suya took a deep breath, and in this moment she seemed far thinner and paler. In truth, she and Lin Ming only had a cooperative relationship. At best, they could be considered casual friends. With such a light and pale relationship, she didn't have any qualifications to speak out words to ask him to stay. But as she thought about parting here, and perhaps to never meet again, Suya couldn't help but feel an inexplicable loss in her heart. She wanted to say something, but she eventually only looked at Xiao Moxian with envy in her eyes. Xiao Moxian paused. She suddenly felt that Suya, this Suya that she had loathed in the past, suddenly wasn't so annoying. She bit her lips and hesitantly said, "Miss Suya, is there anything you wish to say that isn't convenient? Perhaps it would be better if I left first." Seeing Xiao Moxian's response, Suya was stunned. Then, she chuckled, her smile bright and friendly. "It's nothing special. I wish that you and Lin Ming can grow old together until your hair turns white. I wish that you two remain safe and happy, and I wish that your home will be filled with children and grandchildren, all of them dragons and phoenixes. Suya had finally said a blessing mostly used by mortals. As for the world of martial artists, although there were blessings and praises, they rarely ever mentioned growing old or having many descendants. This was because martial artists lived long lives and to them descendants were not an extension of their lives. There was also no need to bring honor to their ancestors. When blessings were given, it was usually to wish for others to have breakthroughs in their boundaries and for their strength to increase. As Suya suddenly spoke out this strange mortal blessing, Xiao Moxian blushed red. She didn't know what to say for some time. However, she immediately thought of something else and imperceptibly sighed. Between her and Lin Ming, it was impossible to have a home filled with children and grandchildren. This was because the more powerful a race was, the more difficult it was to bear children. God beasts were the supreme example of this. Even when two god beasts of the same race came together, they might not be able to produce a child. As for Xiao Moxian, she was a half-phoenix. Her birth was a miracle of the universe, something that might not occur even within a billion years in the divine realm. With Xiao Moxian, her god beast bloodline was already far paler than that of a true god beast. But with Lin Ming, it wouldn't be easy to have children. Although having children wouldn't be as difficult as Xiao Moxian's own birth, it wouldn't be strange if she never became pregnant in hundreds of thousands or even millions of years. In the worst-case situation, she would never have children of her own. Thinking of this, Xiao Moxian was inexplicably moved. She couldn't help but fear such a future. She wanted to have a child that belonged to her and Lin Ming. Lin Ming and Xiao Moxian's minds were connected and he could faintly guess what she was thinking. He gently gripped her hand. That night, Lin Ming bid his farewells to Suya. He also went searching for old Su and old Xiu and said his goodbyes to them too. Besides that, he didn't alert anyone else. After all, Lin Ming was far too valuable and had far too much wealth on him. Even if he had a supposed great master behind him serving as a deterrent, he couldn't guarantee that some people wouldn't decide to take the risk to kidnap him. He first changed his appearance with the divine dream law. Then, Xiao Moxian hid away in Primordia's heavenly palace. With this, he quietly left through a secret transmission network within the Divine Runic Masters Guild. He blended into the crowds of people and disappeared into the endless night. The broad and limitless inner Asura road lay before him. The vast starry skies illuminated the great wilderness. In this world, there were countless hidden divine treasure troves. Innumerable heroes journeyed through this world, finding their own fortunes, many of them dying in the process. Lin Ming disguised Primordia's heavenly palace as a spirit ship. Then, like a meteor, he cut through the skies. Tip, you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Martial World. Chapter 1655 Seeing Empire and Divine Mist once again. Chapter 1655 Seeing Empire and Divine Mist once again. God-Burying Ridge was located in the Outer Asura Road, and the Outer Asura Road was separated from the Inner Asura Road by the Great Desolate. To travel through this expanse was something that not even an Empyrean could do, let alone Lin Ming. However, Lin Ming had used part of his 5 billion points to purchase an Asura command. Using this Asura command, he was able to take an ancient transmission array that teleported him to the Outer Asura Road. Since he left God-Burying Ridge, almost 30 years had passed. God-Burying Ridge was still a famous dangerous land within the Great Desolate. Sometimes a trial challenger received missions that sent them to the peripheries or even into God-Burying Ridge itself and they would have to hire a guide or two to lead them in. Even so, there was only a narrow chance of surviving that nightmarish land. Of course, this wasn't a problem to Lin Ming at all. He flew towards God-Burying Ridge almost in a straight line. There simply wasn't much that was able to hinder him. Just an hour later, Lin Ming arrived at Tragic Death Valley. This place hadn't changed at all. The entrance of Tragic Death Valley resembled a massive black hole, a door that one could only enter through and never leave. Lin Ming didn't hesitate. He controlled Primordia's heavenly palace and flew straight in. Compared to the gaping black hole entrance, Primordia's heavenly palace was like a little pebble sinking into a lake. It quietly sank in without arousing the tiniest wave. As soon as they entered Tragic Death Valley, Lin Ming and Xiao Moxian stepped out and arrived at the God Beast tomb with a familiar ease. Here was the dwelling where Empire and Divine Mist stayed. At novel being at. But as Lin Ming stepped in front of the dwelling and saw Empire and Divine Mist's situation, he felt his heart ache. Empire and Divine Mist's dwelling was constructed in the crevice between two giant God Beast bones. Within this dwelling was a giant soul crystal where Empire and Divine Mist had sealed away his mortal body. The image he gave off was similar to that of a fly trapped inside amber. But, the giant soul crystal that was used to maintain Empire and Divine Mist's life was already ruined. The soul crystal was covered with cracks and many places had been turned to white powder. This was what happened after a soul crystal lost its energy. Dusting off this powder, Lin Ming finally saw Empire and Divine Mist sealed within. At this time, Empire and Divine Mist's eyes were shut tight. His appearance was old and decrepit, like a piece of deadwood that had long since lost any vibrancy. His body didn't glow at all nor were there any life fluctuations. He was no different from a dead person. Grandpa Divine Mist, Xiao Moxion whispered, her heart nearly crawled out of her chest. She was afraid of what she saw. During the 9 years she spent in Tragic Death Valley, she had been with Empire and Divine Mist for a great portion of that time and had slowly come to call him Grandpa. Lin Ming frowned. After staring at Empire and Divine Mist for a long time, he slowly took out the soul recovery pill he had refined. This soul recovery pill had used up 200 million points worth of materials. It was the highest level of pill that Lin Ming could currently create. He gently guided a wisp of the pill's soul recovering essence energy to enter the soul crystal, slowly nourishing Empire and Divine Mist's dilapidated body. Lin Ming could feel that Empire and Divine Mist had yet to completely die. He should have entered a state of suspended animation in which all of his life activities were reduced to nothing. In truth, this state wasn't much different from true death. The pill that Lin Ming refined was still almost a transcendent divine level pill. Even a wisp of essence energy was extraordinary. The soul crystal that had lost nearly all of its soul energy began to glow once more after being vitalized by this essence energy. However, Empire and Divine Mist himself remained motionless, his eyes still shut tight. If Lin Ming had anything, it was patience. Slowly, bit by bit, he poured in the divine soul energy from the soul recovery pill. This energy came as thinly and gently as threads of silk. The reason he did this was because he was afraid that Empire and Divine Mist's crumbling body wouldn't be able to withstand an influx of energy. This process continued for an entire day and night. After a fifth of the soul recovery pill's soul energy was consumed, Empire and Divine Mist's eyelids finally quivered. Although this movement was almost imperceptible, Xiao Moxion still nearly jumped up from where she was. Big brother Lin. I saw it. Lin Ming's expression was extremely focused. His hands and motions remained unhesitant and the energy flow he poured in also remained steady and smooth. At this time, Lin Ming and Xiao Moxion heard an old voice echo in their ears. You came back. Empire and Divine Mist slowly opened his eyes. Seemingly because he had lost almost all of his life force, he opened his eyes with great difficulty. Although he had regained consciousness, the fires of his life were a dwindling flame in a hurricane. The dignified aura and majesty of an Empire Ian had mostly faded away from his body. Currently, Empire Ian Divine Mist resembled an old mortal man knocking on death's door. An almost transcendent divine pill level soul recovery pill, on me, this is wasted. Empire Ian Divine Mist lightly sighed, as if he had already given up all thoughts of living on in this hell. Grandpa Divine Mist, how come you don't want to live on? Don't you want to take revenge? Xiao Moxion said with a faintly reproachful tone. Revenge. That is too far away. Empire Ian Divine Mist closed his eyes once more, feeling far too tired. His enemy was a true divinity level powerhouse. With his abilities, revenge was impossible. Empire Ian Divine Mist didn't even have any hopes that Lin Ming would take revenge for him. Even though he believed that Lin Ming would one day break into the true divinity realm, that was an incomparably distant matter. Moreover, since both of them would be true divinities, why would Lin Ming go all out in a battle with Empire Ian Divine Void for a half-dead man like himself? Empire Ian Divine Mist had long since given up thoughts of revenge. This pill, where did you find it? Empire Ian Divine Mist looked towards Lin Ming. Even though he knew Lin Ming was strong, his cultivation was still limited. It would be extremely difficult for him to acquire a nearly transcendent divine pill level soul recovery pill. Even if he sold all his possessions he might not have the money for it. Junior refined it himself. Lin Ming honestly said. What? Lin Ming's words caused a flash of astonishment to cross Empire Ian Divine Mist's face. You refined it, yourself? Empire Ian Divine Mist looked at Lin Ming with disbelief sketched on his face, nearly unable to believe his own ears. This pill, even a great world king level alchemist, might not be confident enough to refine it. Moreover, there is also the divine runic arts used upon it. Empire Ian Divine Mist was a spiritas Empire Ian, thus he naturally had an understanding of the divine runic arts. He could see that the divine runic symbol on the soul recovery pill stemmed from the hands of some considerably talented individual. Just as Lin Ming was thinking about how to explain this, Empire Ian Divine Mist didn't seem to have any idea of asking. Empire Ian Divine Mist sighed and said, forget it, you are someone who broke through the God Beast 2 Murray formation that no one managed to break through for 10 billion years. It isn't strange for anything to happen to you. Empire Ian Divine Mist slowly said, each word seeming to use up a massive amount of his origin energy. Lin Ming probed Empire Ian Divine Mist's situation. In the end, he couldn't help but come to the conclusion that even the soul recovery pill wouldn't be able to bring back Empire Ian Divine Mist's life from the brink of death. Empire Ian Divine Mist's life was already ruined. Even if he were to completely digest all the medicinal efficacy within this soul recovery pill, the most he could live for was another few thousand years. Even if Lin Ming continued to refine soul recovery pills for Empire Ian Divine Mist, the longest he could live on was 10,000 years. It was impossible for him to live any longer than this. And these 10,000 years of life would only mean more suffering and more pain for Empire Ian Divine Mist. He had lived in this eternally dark forsaken land. To live for another 10,000 years, was there any meaning to it? If Soul Emperor Divine Void didn't die, he would never be able to leave. And with Soul Emperor Divine Void's status as a true divinity level powerhouse, it was impossible for Lin Ming to kill him before Empire Ian Divine Mist turned to ashes. Thinking of this, Lin Ming suddenly stopped his movements, as if he were coming to a decision. Big brother Lin, what are you? Xiao Moxian was puzzled. Lin Ming hesitated for a long time. Then, he said, Senior Divine Mist, Junior has a divine tool that can hold your soul. But, this is only your soul. You will have to discard your mortal body. The divine tool that Lin Ming spoke of was the magic cube. The Spiritas had mortal bodies, but their mortal bodies were nearly unable to be trained. The main use of their mortal bodies was to serve as vessels for their souls. Lin Ming asked Empire Ian Divine Mist to give up on his mortal body and allow his soul to be sealed in the magic cube where he would fall into a deep sleep. When Lin Ming was powerful enough, he could find a way to help Divine Mist recover consciousness and then find a body for him. At the very least, Empire Ian Divine Mist could watch as he took revenge on Empire Ian Divine Void for him. Then he could die in peace. Divine Tool. Divine Mist was startled. He could faintly feel that this divine tool that Lin Ming referred to was his secret. If he called it a divine tool, then it definitely wasn't something ordinary. It had to be at least a treasure refined by a true divinity. However, he still sighed and said, it's useless. Even if it is only my soul, as long as I leave Tragic Death Valley my brother will sense me. When he arrives, you will die. We can try. Lin Ming was extremely confident in the magic cube. Through these years he had confirmed that the magic cube was something that surpassed the realm of true divinity. Within the magic cube was another world, one separate from all rules. No matter what rules people created, they had never been able to block the magic cube. The only exception had been the Asura Road Master. In some ways, the rules he laid down in the Asura Road could not be violated by the magic cube, they could be said to stand even with each other. Lin Ming didn't believe that Soul Emperor Divine Void could stand on par with the Asura Road Master. As for the secrets of the magic cube, once Empire Ian Divine Mist's soul was sealed within it and placed in a deep slumber, it would be impossible for him to reveal any secrets, so Lin Ming wasn't worried about it. As Lin Ming thought this, he flicked his fingers. From within his inner world, a black cube slowly flew out and began revolving in the air. When Empire Ian Divine Mist saw this black cube, his mind suddenly shook. From the point of death, Empire Ian Divine Mist recovered a great deal of his spirit. He stared at the magic cube, surprised and speechless. His eyes shot wide open. After gazing at the magic cube for a long time, he mumbled. How is this possible, this is. Seeing Empire Ian Divine Mist's reaction, Lin Ming was startled. He asked in return, Senior, do you happen to know of this divine tool? Tip, you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Martial World. Chapter 1656 Legend of the Spiritas. Chapter 1656 Legend of the Spiritas. Empire Ian Divine Mist seemed to fall into a long period of recollection. He closed his eyes, deep in thought. After a long time he finally began to slowly say, I cannot be sure, but if I'm not wrong, this should be the stone of eternal life recorded within the Spiritas Holy Scripture. With this stone, your soul will become eternal and your life everlasting. Spiritas Holy Scripture, Lin Ming mumbled. He thought back to what he knew and faintly remembered that there was such a book. Lin Ming had swallowed the memories of dark and perverse divine runic masters like Torch River. And, these divine runic masters were almost nearly all Spiritas. Some of them had even read duplicate copies of the Spiritas Holy Scripture and knew some of the records within. But because these memories weren't too important to Lin Ming's training of the divine runic arts, he hadn't studied them, but he hadn't tossed them away either. Now that Empire Ian Divine Mist spoke of this term, Lin Ming carefully went back through the memories he had of the Spiritas Holy Scripture. The Spiritas Holy Scripture could be called the most mysterious and enigmatic sacred text of the Spiritas. It was impossible to know just which Supreme Elder had written the Spiritas Holy Scripture, but there were many things recorded within it. Some things were secrets of the universe, some were notes on the laws, and some were even prophecies of the future. All of this text had been slowly verified over time. It was no longer known where the original Spiritas Holy Scripture was. According to some rumors, it was within the hands of a Spiritas true divinity level great emperor. As for the Spiritas Holy Scripture that spread out to the entire Spiritas race, that was nothing but a duplicate. Even though it was a duplicate, this text wasn't something that everyone could read, simply because there were far too many secrets within that were related to the Spiritas. It was a strange and mystical existence, and ordinary Spiritas martial artists didn't even know of its existence. Those on the level of Torch River were only able to come into faint contact with it. The duplicate copies of the Spiritas Holy Scripture could only reproduce the text of the universe's secrets as well as some archaic prophecies. As for the recordings of the laws and other such things, those were impossible to copy. Thus, there was simply no comparing the value of the duplicate of the Spiritas Holy Scripture to the original. In Torch River's mind, if someone was able to obtain the original copy of the Spiritas Holy Scripture and also had extraordinary talent, they could cultivate the laws within the text.